We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Challenges aplenty for affirmative action for those who would rather not see it go by the wayside. We're joined once again for our Talking Liberty segment here on Liberty Nation Radio by legal scholar, host of the excellent Uprising podcast, and Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, and snappily dressed man, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. Thanks for coming in, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure.
So, Scott, the fallout is really just building up in the after affirmative action was essentially scrapped by the Supreme Court. What's happening?
Well, they are not willing to kind of go with the law.
The ephemeral, elusive being
Well, the sort of leftist powers that be that are driving the popular discussion. Let's say there's a lawsuit that has been filed by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, which is a leftist Boston-based nonprofit lawyers group that claims to represent, I believe, some minority groups, and they're suing Harvard, saying that they challenging their practice of legacy admissions. One of the things we learned about with their admissions criteria is that there are a few factors that make one more likely to get in than not, right? One of them used to be being a black or brown person, for instance. That was declared unconstitutional. But one of the other factors was legacy status. If your parent went to Harvard or a close other family member who wrote and campaigned for you to be accepted as a legacy, that greatly increased your chances. And
let me just jump in on this, Scott.
Sure.
There's a couple of things I'd like to clarify. So there are a number of factors that were considered in granting admission to students. Now, the largest or most significant of which was race. Is that correct?
So there were four categories of factors that were the most significant relative to all others. Okay. And then within those four factors, so race was one of those factors. Income level was a second. The third one was legacy. I forget what the fourth one was. Within that metric of four, race was, if you said, oh, gee, would it be better to have, two identical candidates and one of them's dad went to Harvard and one of them was black, whose parents didn't go to Harvard, you'd much rather be the applicant who had the correct or favored skin color in this case, rather than some other category.
So essentially this lawsuit, without attributing negative motivation, as it were, but this really seems to be a backlash saying, well, if these people...
Oh, no, you don't need to... You can attribute the motivation.
Oh, okay, then. So what they're saying is, hey, if you won't let in these people for this reason, if you won't let in these people for this reason, you shouldn't let in the white people. Now, I want to drill down into this, because presumably what they're saying is the white people are the legacy admissions, the majority of legacy admissions. Is that true?
All your questions are answered by tuning into MSNBC, Mark, the official organ for these groups. And right after the decision broke, they went out and said, Joy Reid came out and said, I was a affirmative action admittee. I didn't deserve to go to Harvard, except for the fact that the color of my skin. That's the only reason I went there. And also, we should take away from white people legacy admissions. It is exactly hey, you team whitey, we're going to try to hurt you because this decision hurt us. And that's the impetus.
So I want to kind of figure this out precisely, because it seems to me that it doesn't actually make sense, because at the moment, 2022 to 2023 year, the majority of students are minority students for intake. Is that correct?
I can't be sure about that at the moment.
Okay, I believe
without checking, I wouldn't want to be wrong.
34% are white students and the rest are a minority.
That sounds right, but
I think that's correct. I apologize if it's wrong, but doesn't this mean that future applicants to Harvard, the majority of them will be from a minority background? So if they remove legacy, you're actually impacting further down the line.
Eventually you would. But
so this doesn't make any sense to do this, right?
It's not going to matter in any case, Mark, because the issue of racial discrimination is one that because of our country's history and our laws and our Constitution, we take in a totally different class of scrutiny over whether one can judge on that basis rather than whether one can judge on the basis of, for instance, where one's parents went to college. Now, part of the arguments of the attorneys in this case will be that it produces a discriminatory effect, but that won't work. I don't believe that the Supreme Court or in this case or others is going to say, like, just because you take some path and that has a result where fewer of one applicant of race, fewer members of a certain race will do as well than they do at their representation in the general population. That will not be sort of ascribed to impermissible racial prejudice and judgment, which is what they're hoping for. And also, I think, it's a publicity stunt. It's sort of right.
Yeah, so I remember, I think it was the day of the decision, Elizabeth Warren tweeted about what a terrible decision it was. And then somebody started circulating a copy of her college admission paper. It's Native American.
No. That was her bar membership.
Oh, her bar
sign-up card. So
right.
Even well into adulthood, not a childlike, not, meaning like she's supposed to be an adult now, an attorney, and she writes American Indian for race. And of course, she's not. And why would she do it except to get the unearned benefit that they were going to give out to, a preferred minority?
So there's another case also coming forward regarding affirmative action, Scott.
Well, it's not a case. So what's happened is the NAACP has launched a campaign. And it's called Diversity No Matter What. Now, why would they call it diversity no matter what? It's quite shocking, Mark, because of all the legal work that the NAACP is kind of famous for in this country. But no matter what is no matter the Supreme Court's decision that says that to discriminate on the basis of race is illegal and violative of our Constitution. So that's the no matter what. It's a shocking campaign that basically just encourages the continued racial discrimination in spite of the ruling.
Well, no matter what is essentially the same as saying by any means necessary, right? And there's a lot of historical context with by any means necessary. These are, this was plastered all over the nation during the summer of love, as it was when the nation burned. And so it seems to me that, as you say, at the NAACP, its whole raison d'etre was to function within the legal framework, right? And now they're saying
absolutely, yeah,
that this doesn't matter because no matter what means no matter what the framework. So they're jettisoning that in favor of this push for, and let's be clear, this is not a push for actual diversity, is it, Scott? We've talked about this before. This is a push for skin color diversity, which I think is possibly the least diverse thing about people, isn't it?
Well, it is just that. The more you get into the weeds on the actual details, the more disturbing the whole system is. For instance, a white person is a person who could be born and raised in Sweden, could be a Kurdish refugee from Iraq, a Ukrainian refugee, or an American. Those are all the same type of person to have in the classroom. And
despite the lived experience that we hear so much about.
And for Asian, I think it could be like, if you're a millionaire's kid from Tokyo and you're from the jungles of Vietnam, and from a rural Philippine island, you're just an Asian. Like that's the same bucket. Or an American, by the way, who grew up in a tract house outside of Santa Fe, but also of Asian descent. You're all in the same bucket. So like the idea that they're going for this authentic, unique experience that each of us brings to the table that might be reflected in our race in some way, it's bupkis.
And there you have it, the official word from the University of Bupkis. Scott D. Cosenza, thanks ever so much.
Cheers.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio. My thanks to our guests, Tim Donner, Andrew Moran, Lisa K. Donner, and Scott D. Cosenza. And of course, to you, our listeners, for tuning in. I'd like to leave you with a couple of observations by the legendary commentator and author P.J. O'Rourke regarding the money and politics nexus. He said, when buying and selling are controlled by legislation, the first thing to be bought and sold are the legislators. Now, as long as politics can be a career for fiscal enrichment, cold hard cash will always play a role. And yet, even if this were a necessary grift to assure the very best people lead the nation, it might be a price we're willing to pay. But as O'Rourke so skillfully reminds us, giving money and power to government is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys. And from that truism, there appears no escape. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.